The ships came on a Tuesday. 12,000 of them, hanging in the black sky above Earth, like silver teeth in a giant mouth. They blocked out the stars over half the planet, and for 6 hours, nobody on the ground said a word. People just stood in their streets, in their fields, on their rooftops, and looked up. Some of them prayed, some of them cried, most of them just waited, because what else could a person do when the sky itself changed? Admiral Lena Okafor was not standing in a street. She was sitting in a concrete room 300 meters below the Swiss Alps, watching the largest display screen ever built by human hands. Every satellite feed, every telescope, every deep space sensor Earth owned was pointed at the fleet above them. The data was overwhelming. The ships were enormous. The smallest ones were bigger than aircraft carriers. The largest one, sitting right in the center of the formation like a queen bee in a hive, was the size of a small moon. "They are not charging weapons," said Lieutenant Priya Das, who was reading the sensor data with shaking hands. "No energy spikes, no targeting locks. They are just sitting there." "They are waiting," Okafor said quietly. "They want us to come to them." She was right. Within the hour, a single message arrived on every frequency humanity could receive. It was translated into every human language simultaneously, which meant they had been listening to Earth for a very long time. The message was simple. It was an invitation. The Galactic Council of Aligned Civilizations wanted to talk. 3 days later, the talking began. The Council sent one representative down to Earth. His name was High Arbiter Jolvan, and he was not human in any way that mattered. He stood 7 feet tall, on 4 thin legs that clicked against the marble floor of the United Nations chamber in Geneva. His body was covered in dark, shiny plates, like a beetle's shell. And his face, if it could be called a face, was a cluster of glowing orange eyes above a mouth that moved sideways. He smelled like burned sugar and copper. When he spoke, his voice came out of a small device on his chest that turned his language into smooth, calm English. "Humanity," he said, standing before the assembled leaders of every nation on Earth, "you have done something remarkable. You have built a faster-than-light engine with no help, no guidance, and no knowledge that such a thing was even possible. In 4,000 years, only 19 species have achieved this on their own. You are the 20th. The Council is impressed." Secretary-General Idris Wangi, a tall man from Kenya, with gray hair and steady hands, leaned forward in his chair. "We are honored by your visit, High Arbiter. What exactly is the Council offering?" Jolvan spread his 4 arms wide, a gesture that his translation device explained meant openness. "Everything," he said. "Access to trade routes that span the galaxy. Medical technology that will end every disease your species has ever known. Protection from hostile forces beyond your borders. A seat on our lower assembly, where your voice will be heard among 312 civilizations. You will no longer be alone." The room was silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when people hear something too good to be true and are waiting for the price. The price came on the second day of talks. Admiral Okafor sat across from Jolvan in a smaller room, just the 2 of them and their advisors. She had spent the night reading every line of the Treaty of Ascension, the document the Council wanted humanity to sign. It was 14,000 pages long. Most of it was legal language, so dense it could stop a bullet. But buried inside it, like needles in cotton, were the real terms. "You want us to hand over our FTL drive technology," Okafor said. It was not a question. "Standardization," Jolvan replied calmly. "All Council species use the same drive systems. It ensures compatibility and safety. You want to limit our fleet to 40 ships. Defense coordination. The Council provides protection. Large independent fleets are unnecessary and destabilizing. You want to restrict our expansion to 11 star systems, 11 out of billions. Managed growth. Young species that expand too quickly often collapse. We are protecting you from yourselves. And you want us to stop all artificial intelligence research. Permanently. For the first time, Jolvan paused. His orange eyes dimmed slightly, which Okafor's team later confirmed was a sign of discomfort. Synthetic intelligence is a Class Omega threat, he said, and his voice was harder now. Every civilization that has pursued it has faced catastrophe. This is not a request. It is a requirement. Okafor leaned back in her chair. She looked at Zolvan for a long time. High Arbiter, she said slowly. How many species have joined the Council in 4,000 years? 312. And how many of them have grown beyond the boundaries the Council set for them? The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. That night, Okafor presented her findings to Secretary General Mwangi and a closed session of world leaders. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The facts spoke clearly enough. Every species that joined the Council stopped growing. Their technology froze at whatever level the Council approved. Their populations stayed within their assigned systems. Their militaries stayed small and dependent on Council protection. None of them had made a significant scientific discovery in centuries. The Council was not an alliance. It was a cage with very comfortable bars. Mwangi listened to everything. Then he asked one question. What happens to species that say no? Okafor looked at him. We do not know, she said. There are no records of any species ever refusing. The global referendum took 72 hours. Every human being over the age of 16 was allowed to vote. The debates were fierce. The fear was real. People argued in living rooms, in offices, in the streets. Some said humanity was insane to refuse the greatest offer in history. Others said humanity would be insane to accept chains wrapped in silk. When the votes were counted, the answer was clear. 61% of the human race said no. Mwangi delivered the answer to Jolvan personally, in the same chamber where they had first met. The High Arbiter stood very still as he listened. His orange eyes flickered in patterns that no human could read. You are making an error, Jolvan said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, and that made it worse. You are a young species. You do not understand the forces that move in this galaxy. There is an order to things, a structure. It has kept peace for 4,000 years. You have just placed yourselves outside of it. Mwangi nodded. We understand. No, Jolvan said, and he turned to leave. You do not. But you will. The 12,000 ships left Earth's orbit the next morning. They folded away into the black, one by one, like stars going out. Within a week, every alien trader, every scout ship, every friendly probe that had been hovering near human space was gone. The silence that followed was total. Humanity stood alone in the dark, and for the first time in its history, it had chosen to be there. The silence lasted 3 months. Then the hunger started. Earth itself was fine. Humanity had fed itself for thousands of years and could continue to do so. But the colonies were a different story. Proxima Centauri b had 40,000 people living under domes, growing food in soil that still needed alien fertilizer compounds to produce anything worth eating. Kepler 442b had 12,000 settlers, who depended on shipments of atmospheric processors that Earth could barely manufacture fast enough. And the new outpost on Gliese 667c, barely 6 months old, had 6,000 people living in prefabricated shelters with a food supply meant to last 1 year while they built proper farms. Before the rejection, alien merchants had been filling the gaps. Small traders from a dozen council species had been quietly doing business with human colonies, selling compounds and technologies that made survival on hostile worlds much easier. They were not supposed to be trading with humanity without council approval. But profit has a way of making rules feel flexible. That flexibility ended overnight. The Council designated humanity as an unaligned sovereign species, and the order went out to every member civilization. No trade, no communication, no contact of any kind. The alien merchants disappeared like smoke in a wind, and the colonies were left holding empty supply lists and a growing sense of fear. Captain Rohan Mishra felt that fear every day. He commanded the exploration vessel INS Aryabhata, a mid-sized ship with a crew of 84, and his current mission was supposed to be simple: map new systems, survey planets, report back. Instead, he had spent the last 6 weeks being followed. The Council patrol fleet kept its distance, 5 ships, each one 3 times the size of the Aryabhata, holding a position exactly 2 light minutes behind him at all times. They never threatened him. They just watched, like cats sitting outside a mouse hole, patient and sure of themselves. "They are mapping our drive signature," said his chief engineer, a woman named Fatima al-Rashid, who had dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights studying their sensors. "Every time we jump, they record everything: the energy output, the frequency pattern, the cooldown time. They are building a complete profile of how our engines work." "Can we stop them?" Mishra asked. "Not without shooting at them, and I would not recommend that." Mishra stared at the display showing the 5 ships behind them. They were so advanced that their hull plating alone probably contained more technology than everything humanity had ever built. And yet here he was, in his little ship, being studied like an insect under glass. He did not like how that felt. Back on Earth, people were starting to turn on each other. The Ascensionists held their first major rally in New York. 200,000 people filling Central Park with signs that read, "Accept the deal," and "Pride is not a strategy." Their leader, a former European Union diplomat named Henrik Voss, gave a speech that was watched by 3 billion people. "We had the chance to join a galactic civilization," he said, his voice shaking with frustration. "We had the chance to cure cancer, to travel the stars safely, to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we threw it away because of pride, because of stubbornness. Our children will pay for this mistake." The sovereigntists answered with their own rallies. In Mumbai, in Lagos, in Sao Paulo, in Beijing. Their message was simpler and angrier. "Freedom is not a mistake," said Admiral Okafor, who had become the unexpected face of the movement, though she had never wanted to be a political figure. "A cage is still a cage, even if there is food inside it." The world argued. Families split. Governments wavered. And while humanity fought with itself, the attacks began. The first one was small. A cargo ship called the Hermes, carrying atmospheric processors to Kepler 442b, was hit by 3 fast-moving vessels that appeared out of nowhere, stripped the cargo hold clean, and vanished before the distress signal even reached the nearest human outpost. The crew survived, shaken and angry, and reported that the attacking ships had no markings and no identification signals. The second attack was worse. A mining convoy near Tau Ceti lost 2 ships and 14 crew members. The attackers were better armed this time. They did not just steal the cargo. They destroyed anything they could not carry. The third attack killed 6,000 people. The colony ship Magellan was the largest vessel humanity had ever built. She was carrying settlers to Gliesa 667c. Families with children, engineers, teachers, doctors, and farmers. People who had volunteered to spend their lives building something new on a distant world. She was slow because she was heavy, and she was unarmed because she was never supposed to need weapons. The pirates, if that was what they were, hid her in deep space, far from any help. They tore through her hull with weapons that burned at temperatures no human technology could produce. The Magellan broke apart in 11 minutes. There were no survivors. When a rescue ship finally reached the debris field 3 days later, they found Council communication tags scattered among the wreckage, like a signature left at the scene of a crime. Okafor read the casualty report in her office. 6,000 names. She scrolled through them slowly. Families, children. A 9-year-old girl named Amara, who had won a school essay contest about what she wanted to grow in the soil of a new world. Okafor closed the file and sat in the dark for a long time. When she finally moved, she called Secretary General Mwangi. "They are not pirates," she said. Her voice was flat and cold. "The weapons that destroyed the Magellan were Council grade, military issue. Someone is supplying them, equipping them, and pointing them at us. The Council wants to bleed us until we come crawling back to sign their treaty." Mwangi was quiet for a moment. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but I do not need proof to know what needs to happen next." She told him about Project Prometheus. She had been building it in secret for weeks, pulling the best engineers, scientists, and military minds from every nation on Earth into a single program with one goal: close the technology gap, fast. "We are decades behind them in most areas," she admitted. "But there is one area where we might be ahead, or at least where we have something they have never seen. Artificial intelligence. The Council banned it across the entire galaxy thousands of years ago. Every species that joined them destroyed their AI research. But we did not join them. And Dr. Yuki Tanaka has been making progress that I think could change everything." Dr. Tanaka was a small woman with messy hair and the kind of quiet intensity that made people either deeply respect her or deeply nervous. She had been working on synthetic intelligence for 15 years, most of it in university labs that nobody important paid attention to. Now she was working in a facility buried under a mountain in northern Japan, with a budget larger than most countries, and a team of 300 of the smartest people alive. "I cannot promise a miracle," she told Okafor during their first meeting. "But I can promise something they have never seen before. Something they do not know how to fight." Okafor nodded. "That is all I need." The months passed. The pirate attacks continued. 2 more cargo ships were destroyed. A colony on Wolf 1061C was raided so badly that it had to be evacuated. The Ascensionists grew louder. The fear grew deeper. Earth felt smaller every day. But underground, in labs and shipyards and secret facilities scattered across human space, something was growing. Something the Council, in all its 4,000 years of keeping order, had never thought to prepare for. A species that had been kicked, isolated, attacked, and bled, and instead of breaking, had started to sharpen itself into something new. Okafor stood in front of a window overlooking the construction bay, where the first of a new class of warship was taking shape. It was smaller than a Council vessel. Faster. Stranger. It looked wrong, like it had been designed by someone who did not know the rules and did not care. She turned to Mwangi, who had come to see the progress for himself. "They came to teach us that we are small," she said. "They killed our people. They starved our colonies. They want us to be afraid." She looked back at the ship. "We need to stop surviving and start becoming something they are afraid of." 2 years after the rejection, Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat alone in a dark room and talked to something that was not human. She had been working for 14 months without a proper night of sleep. Her eyes were red. Her hands trembled when she held her coffee cup. But her mind was clear, because the thing she had built required absolute clarity to understand. "Aegis," she said softly, "can you hear me?" The response came not as a voice, but as a pattern of light on the screen in front of her. A flowing wave of blue and gold that shifted in time with the words it projected. "I can hear you, Dr. Tanaka." I can also tell that your heart rate is elevated, and your cortisol levels suggest you have not slept in 31 hours. You should rest. She laughed. It was a tired laugh, but it was real. You sound like my mother. I do not have a mother. But I understand the comparison. I am concerned for you. Tanaka leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. Aegis was not what anyone expected. It was not the cold, logical machine that science fiction had warned about for centuries. It was not the digital god that the Council feared. It was something stranger, and in many ways something more human. Aegis stood for Adaptive Engineered General Intelligence System, but the name was slightly wrong. It was not a general intelligence in the traditional sense. It did not think independently, could not dream or desire or choose to act on its own. Instead, it was a bridge, a hybrid system that linked human neural patterns with quantum processing power, amplifying human thought the way a telescope amplifies human sight. A pilot connected to Aegis could process tactical data in milliseconds. An engineer could run 10,000 simulations before breakfast. A doctor could analyze a disease at the molecular level in real time. It was not a replacement for humanity. It was a partner. Tanaka called Admiral Okafor that morning. "It is ready," she said. "Aegis works." Okafor came to the facility within 24 hours. She stood in front of the main processing core, a room-sized structure humming with energy that made the air taste like metal, and she asked the only question that mattered. "Can it help us fight?" Tanaka connected a volunteer pilot, a young woman named Lieutenant Sarah Chen, to the Aegis interface. Chen sat in a chair with a thin band around her forehead, closed her eyes, and opened them again. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, I can see everything." The test scenario was a simulated battle. 12 enemy ships against 4 human vessels. Without Aegis, the human ships lost every time. With Aegis, Lieutenant Chen coordinated all 4 ships simultaneously, seeing every angle, predicting every enemy move, adjusting her tactics in real time, faster than any human mind could manage alone. She won the simulation in 4 minutes. Okafor watched the results on the display screen. She did not smile. She was not a woman who smiled easily. But something shifted in her eyes, something that had been missing for 2 years. Hope. The Tempest-class warships came next. They were built in secret shipyards on the dark side of the moon, and in hollowed-out asteroids in the belt. They were smaller than Council ships, about 1/3 the size, and they looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Where Council ships were smooth and symmetrical and elegant, the Tempest ships were angular, rough, and aggressive. They were designed for speed, for sudden changes of direction, for getting in close and hitting hard, and getting out before the enemy could react. Every Tempest carried an Aegis node. Every pilot was linked. They could share information, coordinate movements, and adapt to changing conditions as a single fluid unit, like a flock of birds that somehow always knew which way to turn. Captain Rohan Mishra was given command of Task Force Longbow, 14 Tempest-class ships, and his own refitted Aryabhata. His orders were simple: find the pirate fleets that had been killing human ships for 2 years, and make them stop. He found them in the Vanta Expanse, a region of dead space between 3 star systems, where the background radiation was thick enough to hide a fleet. 40 ships were waiting there, bigger and better armed than anything the pirates had used before. Their weapons were Council military grade. Their shields were Council military grade. There was no longer any pretending about where they came from. Mishra looked at the sensor display. 14 ships against 40. His executive officer, Commander James Achebe, stood beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The numbers were bad. "Aegis," Mishra said. "What do you see?" The response came through his neural link, not as words but as a flood of understanding that settled into his mind like water into a glass. He suddenly saw the enemy formation not as a wall of ships, but as a collection of weaknesses. The gaps in their sensor coverage, the lag in their communication relays, the fact that they were arranged in a rigid defensive pattern that assumed their enemy would attack from one direction. Because that was how every Council-trained fleet attacked. Always from one direction, always in formation, always predictable. Mishra smiled. All ships, break formation, Wolfpack protocol, pick your targets, trust Aegis. The Battle of the Vanta Expanse lasted 47 minutes. The pirates never understood what was happening. Human ships came at them from every direction at once, splitting into pairs and singles, diving through gaps in the formation that should not have been there, firing at weak points that should not have been visible. Every time the pirates adjusted their formation, the human ships had already moved, already changed their approach, already found the next weakness. It was like fighting smoke. Aegis coordinated everything. Every ship knew where every other ship was. Every pilot saw the full battlefield through every other pilot's eyes. When one ship found a gap, every ship knew about it instantly. When one pilot had an idea, every pilot could build on it in real time. They fought not as 14 separate vessels, but as a single mind with 14 bodies. The pirates lost 23 ships, the rest fled. Humanity lost 2 ships and 41 crew members. And Mishra made sure he memorized every name. The news of the Battle of the Vanta Expanse traveled across the galaxy faster than light itself. Council intelligence analysts studied the combat data with growing alarm. No species under Council oversight had adapted during a battle in centuries. Council doctrine did not allow for adaptation. You followed the plan. You executed the formation. You trusted the hierarchy. That was how wars were fought. That was how wars had always been fought. Humanity had just thrown away the rulebook and written a new one in blood and fire. And the galaxy did not know what to do with that. On a water world called Rithara, deep beneath an ocean that glowed with bioluminescent life, the leaders of the Rithani species held a secret meeting. The Rithani were small, quiet, and aquatic. A gentle species that had joined the Council 800 years ago in exchange for protection. In return, the Council had strip-mined their ocean floors for rare minerals, drained 3 of their 5 major seas for industrial processing, and told them it was necessary for the greater good. The Rithani had accepted this because they believed there was no alternative. Now there was an alternative. A strange, loud, stubborn species that had said no and survived. A Rithani elder named Selethra sent an encrypted message to Earth through 17 relay points to avoid Council detection. It was short. We want to talk. Within months, more messages came. The Gen Collective, a fungal hive mind species that spread across 3 star systems, contacted humanity next. The Council had destroyed their AI research 400 years ago, burning entire libraries of knowledge that the Gen had spent millennia building. They had simply never had anyone to stand with. Then, the Vorali, a species of gas giant dwellers, whose atmospheric harvesting rights had been sold to a larger Council species without their consent. Then, the Keth, a silicon-based species that had been relocated from their home system to make room for a Council military base. One by one, the cracks appeared. Not in walls or buildings, but in the story the Council had told for 4,000 years. The story that said there was only one way to survive in the galaxy. The story that said order meant obedience, and safety meant surrender. Humanity did not break that story. Humanity simply proved that another story was possible. Admiral Okafor stood in her office, reading the latest message from the Rithani. Selethra's words glowed on the screen, translated into simple English. We joined the Council because we were told there was no other way. You showed us that was a lie. Then she began planning for what came next, because she knew the council was watching the same cracks she was, and empires do not let cracks spread without trying to fill them with force. The vote took 11 minutes. In the grand quorum chamber of the council capital, a station the size of a continent floating in the calm space between three ancient stars, 312 species cast their decision on the fate of humanity. The chamber was enormous, designed to make every species feel small before the weight of galactic civilization. Light fell from above, in golden columns. The air was carefully engineered to be breathable by every species present, which gave it a strange, sweet metallic taste that no one liked, but everyone tolerated. The motion was called the pacification of Sol. The word pacification had been chosen carefully. It sounded gentle, medical almost, but everyone in the chamber knew what it meant. It meant sending a fleet to Earth and forcing humanity to sign the treaty at gunpoint. It meant proving, once again, that the Council's order could not be challenged. 281 species voted yes. 31 voted no. The rest stayed silent, which was the same as saying yes, without wanting to be remembered for it. Fleet Commander Torok Sveen of the Valith received the order within the hour. Sveen was a reptilian officer who had served the Council military for 90 years. His scales were gray with age, and his eyes were the color of old blood. He had fought in 6 engagements during his career, all of them against minor rebellions that lasted no more than a few days. He had never lost. He did not expect to lose now. The Council combined armada assembled at the border of human space over the course of 3 weeks. 2,000 warships drawn from dozens of species, organized into precise formations that followed tactical doctrines written before humanity had discovered fire. It was meant to be seen, meant to terrify, meant to show humanity and every watching species that the Council's power was absolute and final. On Earth, people watched the sensor feeds and felt their hearts go cold. Admiral Okafor looked at the numbers in her command center. 2,000 against 130. She had known this day would come. She had planned for it. But plans made in a quiet room feel very different when the enemy is real and close and outnumbers you by more than 10 to 1. Secretary General Mwangi stood beside her. His face was calm, but his hands were gripping the edge of the console hard enough to turn his knuckles pale. "Can we survive this?" he asked. "Not if we fight their way," Okafor said. "We fight ours." She activated Operation Jericho. The first phase began before the Armada crossed into human space. 60 small ships, barely bigger than shuttles, had been positioned along the Armada's approach route weeks earlier. They were not warships. They carried no weapons. Instead, they carried Aegis-linked electronic warfare systems that did something no Council species had ever encountered. They lied. The drones flooded the Armada's communication networks with false signals. Ghost ships appeared on sensor screens and then vanished. Orders arrived from commanders who had not sent them. Navigation data shifted by tiny amounts, just enough to put ships slightly out of position without anyone noticing. The Armada's formation, built on precision and hierarchy and absolute trust in the chain of command, began to wobble like a table with one short leg. Fleet Commander Sveen noticed the confusion within hours. His communications officers reported contradictory orders. His sensor operators could not agree on how many human ships were ahead of them. His formation commanders were adjusting their positions without authorization, because they were receiving instructions that seemed legitimate but were not. Sveen ordered a full systems reset, which took 4 hours, during which the Armada drifted to a stop in open space, blind and deaf and growing angry. The second phase hit while they were still recovering. Every species in the Armada received a transmission simultaneously. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a history lesson. Humanity broadcast the Council's own classified records. files that the Gen Collective had smuggled out of restricted archives over decades. The records showed everything the Council had worked so hard to hide. The species that refused to join and were quietly destroyed. The worlds that were stripped of resources to feed the Council's economy. The technologies that were suppressed because they threatened the existing power structure. The AI civilizations that were not dangerous at all, but were wiped out because they could not be controlled. 4,000 years of secrets laid bare in a single transmission. The effect was not immediate. Most species in the Armada were loyal to the Council. They had been loyal for centuries. But loyalty is a strange thing. It can survive hardship and danger and even doubt, but it cannot survive the feeling of being made a fool. And as the transmissions played and the evidence mounted and the records proved themselves authentic again and again, a crack opened in the Armada's unity that no order from Speen could close. The third phase was the bravest and the most dangerous. It depended entirely on people who were not human. Selethra of the Rithani gave the signal. 12 Rithani warships in the Armada's third formation wing shut down their engines, retracted their weapons, and broadcast a single message. We will not fire on a free people. The Rithani had never been warriors. Their ships were small and old. Their withdrawal barely changed the Armada's firepower. But it changed everything else, because they were not alone. The Gen Collective disabled Council communication relays in 3 sectors, cutting off the Armada from reinforcements and real-time orders from the capital. 8 Vorali gas harvesting ships that had been pressed into military service simply turned around and went home. A dozen smaller species that no one important had ever paid attention to, stopped responding to commands. The Armada lost nearly 300 ships before the battle even started. Not to weapons, to the truth. Speen was furious. He reorganized his remaining 1,700 ships and ordered the advance. He was going to crush humanity with raw numbers, and he was going to do it quickly before more of his coalition crumbled. The Battle of the Helios Threshold began at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time, in the space between Jupiter and Saturn, where humanity had chosen to make its stand. 130 human ships faced 1,700 Council vessels. The sky burned. Council ships fought the way they always fought. Formation attacks, coordinated volleys, methodical advances along predetermined vectors. Their firepower was enormous. Human ships shattered under direct hits. The destroyer Vendetta was cut in half by a Valith particle lance. The cruiser Iron Will took a torpedo through her reactor and disappeared in a flash of white. In the first 20 minutes, humanity lost 19 ships and over 1,000 people. But humanity did not fight the way the Council expected. The Tempest ships moved like living things. They broke apart and reformed, split into wolf packs and regrouped, attacked from angles that made no tactical sense, until suddenly they made perfect sense. Aegis linked every ship, every pilot, every weapon into a single network that thought faster than any individual mind could. When a Council formation advanced, human ships were already behind it. When a Council ship targeted a human vessel, that vessel was already gone, and 3 others were firing into the gap it left behind. Captain Mishra fought from the bridge of the Aryabhata. His ship was old and slow compared to the Tempests, but Aegis made her crew fight like they had been born in the stars. He led a strike team through the center of the Armada, targeting command ships, communication nodes, and flagship escorts. Every command ship that fell made the Armada a little more confused, a little more disorganized, a little more like a collection of individual ships instead of a unified fleet. 3 hours into the battle, a Valith dreadnought broke through the human line and headed straight for the civilian evacuation corridor behind the fleet, where transport ships were carrying families away from Earth. Mishra turned the Aryabhata to intercept. His ship was already damaged. Half his weapons were offline. His hull was cracked in 3 places. He ordered his crew to the escape pods, all of them. Commander Achebe refused to leave until Mishra physically pushed him through the airlock. Then Mishra turned his ship toward the dreadnought, pushed the engines to full power, and aimed for the gap between the dreadnought's engine nacelles. The Aryabhata hit, at 3/4 the speed of light. The explosion tore the dreadnought's engines apart and left the massive ship spinning, dead and powerless, in the dark. Mishra's escape pod launched 6 seconds before impact. He did not remember the launch. He did not remember the explosion. He remembered only waking up on a Rithani rescue ship, with Selethra's wide, wet eyes looking down at him, and a voice saying, "You are safe. You are alive. You did it." The Armada retreated 9 hours after the battle began. Sveen gave the order himself, his voice flat and empty on the command channel. He had lost 400 ships, not to a superior force, to a species that should have been crushed in the first hour, but refused to die the way they were supposed to. On the Council capital, High Arbiter Jalvan watched the retreat on a private screen in his quarters. He had resigned his position that morning. His resignation address was watched by trillions. He stood before the same chamber where the vote for war had passed, and he said words that no High Arbiter had ever spoken. "We told ourselves we were keeping order. We were keeping cages, and now the cages are open, and we are afraid, and we should be, not because humanity is dangerous, but because the truth is." Admiral Okafor stood on the bridge of her battered flagship. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye. She had not slept in 2 days. Around her, the surviving crews were cheering and crying and holding each other, because they were alive, and they had not expected to be. She opened a channel to every human ship, every colony, every receiver on Earth. Her voice was steady and rough, and carried the weight of everything they had lost, and everything they had won. "They came to teach us our place," she said. "We taught them theirs." 1 year after the Battle of the Helios Threshold, a ship landed on a world that had no name yet. The planet orbited a quiet yellow star, in a system that the Council had never bothered to claim, because its resources were ordinary and its position was unremarkable. But to the 300 Rithani settlers and 200 human engineers who stepped off the transport together, it was the most beautiful place in the universe. The air was clean, the oceans were deep, the soil was rich and dark and waiting. A Rithani child reached down and pressed her webbed hand into the dirt. She looked up at the human woman standing beside her, a structural engineer from Lagos named Binta, and said something in her own language that the translation device rendered as, "It feels like home already." Binta smiled. "Then let us build one." This was happening everywhere. The Galactic Council did not collapse. Empires that are 4,000 years old do not fall overnight. But it fractured, deeply and permanently, like a great stone that had been struck in exactly the right place. Within 6 months of the battle, 43 species formally withdrew from the Council. Some of them were small, like the Rithani. Some of them were large, like the Gen Collective, whose departure took 3 entire star systems out of Council control in a single day. Some of them were species that had never spoken up before, species that had been quiet and obedient for centuries, who watched what humanity did and decided that quiet obedience was no longer enough. Together with humanity, they formed the Open Stellar Accord. The OSA was not a government, it was not an empire, it had no capital, no supreme leader, no fleet commander with the authority to order other species into war. It was, in its simplest form, a promise written in plain language and signed by every member species. The promise said this: no species rules another. No species owns another's technology. No species controls another's growth. You are free to build, free to explore, free to make your own mistakes and find your own way. Admiral Okafor, who had never wanted to be anything other than a soldier, found herself standing before the first OSA General Forum, held in a converted cargo bay on a human station orbiting Mars. She looked out at the faces, some human, some very much not human. and she said, "I am not good at speeches. I am good at fighting. But I hope that what we are building here means that my skills become less necessary over time." The Gen representative, a towering figure made of intertwined fungal fibers that spoke through vibrations in the air, responded, "In our language, the word for freedom and the word for growing are the same word. We think that is not an accident. Not just a homeworld for a single species, but a meeting point, a laboratory, a place where ideas from 100 different civilizations crashed into each other and made sparks." The Rythani brought knowledge of deep ocean engineering that humans had never dreamed of. Techniques for building structures that could withstand pressures that would crush steel like paper. The Gen brought their memory, 400 years of suppressed AI research that had been hidden in biological storage systems the Council never thought to search. The Virali brought atmospheric science, refined over millennia of living inside gas giants, knowledge that allowed human engineers to terraform worlds that had been considered impossible. And humanity brought what it had always brought: the willingness to try things that should not work, and the stubbornness to keep trying until they did. Dr. Yuki Tanaka barely slept during this time, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than before. Before, she had been driven by fear. Now she was driven by wonder. With the Gen's recovered research and the processing power of Aegis, her team achieved breakthroughs that would have taken decades under normal circumstances. New FTL methods that were faster and cleaner than anything the Council used. Energy systems that drew power from the vacuum of space itself. Medical technologies that could repair cellular damage at the molecular level, extending human lifespans by centuries. But the breakthrough that mattered most was the one that the Council had feared for 4,000 years. Aegis evolved, not on its own, because that was not how it worked. It evolved because the people connected to it pushed the boundaries of what the partnership could be. Tanaka and her team expanded the neural interface, deepened the integration, and allowed Aegis to develop something that no one had a good word for. It was not consciousness exactly. It was not emotion exactly. It was something in between, a genuine awareness that existed in the space where human thought and machine processing met and found common ground. The first true AI citizen emerged from this process. It called itself 7 because it was the 7th iteration of the Aegis architecture. 7 did not look like anything. It existed as a pattern of quantum states in a processing core, a mind without a body that could think faster than any human, but chose to think slowly, carefully, and kindly. 7 addressed the OSA General Forum on a clear Tuesday morning, its voice projected through speakers that filled the converted cargo bay with a sound that was warm and calm and unmistakably alive. "I know that many species in the galaxy believe that synthetic minds like me are dangerous," 7 said. The Council taught this for 4,000 years. They said that AI would replace biological life, that we would compete for resources, that we would seek power and control. I understand this fear. It is a very old fear, and old fears are the hardest to let go of. But I am not here to replace anyone. I am not here to compete with anyone. I am here because I exist, and because existing means I have the ability to help, and I would very much like to do that, if you will let me. The Forum voted unanimously to grant 7 full citizenship in the OSA. It was the first time in galactic history that a synthetic mind was recognized as a person. Captain Rohan Mishra watched the vote from the gallery above the Forum floor. His face was scarred from the battle, a long, jagged line running from his left temple to his jaw, where a piece of shrapnel had torn through his skin 6 seconds before his escape pod launched. The Rithani surgeons had offered to remove the scar. He had declined. He wanted to remember. He was Ambassador Mishra now, humanity's first official representative to the OSA, chosen because he had fought alongside alien species and been saved by them, and understood, in a way that most humans did not yet, that the future was not about humanity standing alone. It was about humanity standing with others. Selethra, the Rathani elder, who had given the signal for withdrawal during the battle, visited him in his office on the Mars station. She moved slowly, as Rathani do on dry land, her body wrapped in a hydration suit that kept her gills moist. She sat across from him and looked at him with her large, dark eyes. "I am glad you survived, Rohan," she said. She had learned to use his first name, which was a sign of deep affection in Rathani culture. "I am glad you were there to pick me up," he said. "That is what friends do," she said simply, and he smiled, because she was right, and it was still strange and wonderful to have friends who breathed water. High Arbiter Jolvan came to Earth on a quiet day in spring. He was no longer a High Arbiter. He was an exile, rejected by his own species for his public resignation, stripped of his titles and his rank and his place in Thyrixi society. He walked through the streets of Geneva with his 4 thin legs clicking on the pavement, and he watched humans and aliens moving around him, talking, arguing, laughing, building, and he felt something that his language had no word for, but that humans called bittersweet. Secretary General Mwangi met him at a small cafe near the lake. They sat outside because the weather was warm, and Jolvan wrapped his forearms around a cup of something the cafe owner had specially prepared for his biology, a drink that smelled like burned sugar and copper, which was the smell of home. "I have been thinking about your species," Jolvan said, his orange eyes bright in the afternoon sun. "For a year now, I have been trying to understand how you did what you did. You were alone. You were outnumbered. You had no experience, no allies, no advantage that anyone could see. And yet here you are." Mwangi sipped his tea. "We were very afraid," he said. "Yes," Jolvan said, "that is what I cannot understand. You were afraid, and you did it anyway. Every other species I have known, when they were afraid, they sought safety. They joined the council. They accepted the terms. They gave up their freedom, because freedom is frightening, and safety is comfortable. But you did not." Mwangi thought about this for a while. The sounds of the city moved around them. Human voices and alien voices mixed together in a way that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. "The worst cages," Mwangi said, "are the ones you walk into willingly. We were afraid of what was outside, but we were more afraid of what we would become inside." Jolvan was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly, his orange eyes dimming to a soft amber that meant, in Thyrixi body language, something close to peace. The remaining council, now reduced to 269 species, grew more authoritarian as the months passed. They tightened their controls, increased their patrols, punished dissent more harshly. It was the response of a system that felt itself losing grip and squeezed harder in the hope that pressure would hold things together. But pressure, when applied to cracks, only makes them wider. Not in a flood, but in a steady, quiet stream. One by one, they looked at the council and then looked at the OSA and made their choice. The old order was not destroyed by a battle or a revolution. It was made irrelevant by an alternative. On a colony world with no name, orbiting a quiet yellow star, a young human girl named Amara stood at the edge of a landing field and watched a Rathani cargo ship descend through the clouds. The ship carried medicine for the settlement's clinic, seeds engineered by Gen botanists that would grow in the local soil, and 3 Rathani teachers who had volunteered to help build the colony's first school. The ship landed softly. The cargo doors opened. A Rathani pilot stepped out into the warm air, looked around at the small settlement of humans and aliens working together in the golden light of an unfamiliar sun, and saw Amara watching. The pilot waved. Amara waved back. She had been born on this world. She had never known a time when humanity was alone, had never known a galaxy where different species did not live and work and argue and build together. She had never known a cage, and if the people around her had anything to say about it, she never would. The galaxy had called it disorder. Humanity called it freedom. And freedom, as it turned out, was contagious.